I assumed I was only a housekeeper who was compelled to organize books. I'd dust every night in Mr. Lane's enormous library, his collection, and covertly reorganize the shelves, leaving small reading recommendations near his chair, such as literary breadcrumbs. I was certain that nobody was aware of my nocturnal librarianship. Then he summoned me to his study and uttered the words that chilled my blood. "I am aware of your actions." In that, I realized my life was over at that instant. Tell me in the comments before we get started. Which book had the biggest impact on your life? Additionally, if tales of latent abilities, second chances, and the enchantment of, follow this page to ensure you don't miss the next literary masterpiece. Lane Estate was the type of location where you read about in books. Sprawling, menacing, and brimming with wealth beyond what most people will ever see in their lifetime. Despite being a member of the night cleaning team for 6 months, I still felt intruded every time I traversed those marble corridors. The library was the location I was given, and it would be like referring to the ocean as a puddle to call it a library. 3 stories of shelves from floor to ceiling, rolling ladders, leather-chaired reading nooks that are likely more expensive than my car, and an assortment that would make envy, makes university librarians cry. The proprietor, Mr. Lane, was said to have more than 50,000 books. His lack of a system was the issue. I found out about this on my A cookbook was positioned between niche and d'art on the first night when I was dusting the philosophy section. A biography of Einstein was placed next to a romance novel. Dickens's initial editions were dispersed among the floors as if they had been dropped from a helicopter. Literary mayhem ensued, and it brought tears to my English literature degree. I had earned my degree from State University 3 years ago with an English literature degree and aspirations to work in academia or publishing. However, dreams don't settle student loan debt. Additionally, the employment market for English majors was as friendly as a library that was locked. I would submitted applications to numerous literary agencies, publishing houses, and academic institutions. The answers were consistently the same. Either we've chosen a different applicant, or we're searching for someone with more experience. The interviews I had received had concluded with kind rejections and advice to continue developing your portfolio. In the meantime, every month I had to make my student loan payments. My savings account wasn't going to cover my rent, and speeding dangerously close to zero. My roommate informed me that her cleaning business was recruiting for the night, when shifts, decent compensation, flexible scheduling, and no need for prior experience, so I swallowed my pride and put into practice. As I completed the application, I reminded myself that it was only temporary. Until something greater comes along appears. It was 18 months ago. Both of my parents have blue-collar jobs. Made an effort to be helpful. During our weekly phone conversations, my mother would add, "You're gaining life experience, and the proper chance will present itself. You're still reading and learning." However, spending every night in that amazing library, which has more books than most people would ever see, felt as if it were a unique form of agony. I was here, having spent 4 years who had completed a senior thesis on the development of the unreliable narrator while studying literature, who could talk about, I spent hours studying Toni Morrison's themes, and I was compensated to dust the spines of books that I had murdered in order to read. I didn't miss the irony. I worked at the most disorganized library I had ever seen, and was arguably the city's most overqualified cleaner. I initially attempted to disregard it. I wasn't there to evaluate a billionaire's aptitude for organization. However, each night as I vacuumed and dusted the VI, I was more troubled by the gorgeous disarray. Better was due to these texts. They deserve to be loved, read, and discovered. I therefore began modestly, by moving a few books to their proper places, organizing the poetry, assembling all of Shakespeare, and producing a tiny A segment of modern literature that genuinely made sense. Then I became more audacious. I saw that Mr. Lane had a huge leather recliner by the large windows, with a reading chair and a side table that always contained the book he was reading at the time. Every several days the books changed, and I started to observe his preferences. He read it all. Fiction with literary elements, philosophy, scientific books, biographies, and even the odd mystery book. One, I discovered him reading a battered edition of To Kill a Mockingbird at night. I departed the following evening saying, "Go set a watchman," alongside his chair, along with a small note written on library cardstock I'd found in a desk drawer that read, If you liked going back to see Scout as a kid, you might like her just as much as an adult. Fascinating, albeit possibly more intricate, a fellow reader. I signed it in that manner, as I was afraid to use my true name. I needed plausible deniability in the event that he complained to the cleaning service. The book vanished. Encouraged, I carried on with my covert curation the following evening. He was reading when I found him. I left a note regarding magical realism in the wind-up bird chronicle Murakami. After completing a biography of For Additional Understanding of Wartime, Churchill, I recommended The Guns of August. Leadership. Every book vanished. Every note disappeared. And gradually I started to observe modifications to the library itself, returning books to their shelves in the portions that I had arranged. One tiny space at a time, the K-house was coming into order, damaging time. He probably didn't even notice, I told myself. Wealthy individuals had hired everything. Perhaps someone else was rearranging the volumes according to a method I didn't comprehend. However, in my heart, I hoped he was taking a look at my suggestions. Somewhere in this wide, cold, I hoped, mansion, my midnight librarianship was helping someone find new stories. In his own home, Gerard Lane was a ghost, but in the tech world, he was a legend. I had been employed at the estate for 6 months and had perhaps 5 encounters with him. Always from afar. He was about 45 years old, younger than I had anticipated, and had dark hair that appeared to have been combed by his hands while he was thinking, and the sort of laser-like concentration that made you feel. He seemed to be able to see past walls. The other employees whispered about him, but none of it was especially positive. He dismissed the previous librarian for relocating just one book. Without her consent, had security escort her out, without even giving her an opportunity to explain. Because the salad course was presented on the incorrect plates, he once forced a chef to rewrite the entire dinner party menu. The man sees everything and shows no mercy. The narratives depicted a person. Successful yet alone, brilliant but impossible. He created a tech business worth billions. However, the staff claims that he had no faith in anyone and appeared to like even fewer individuals, which increased the sense of danger associated with my hidden book organization. Each night, as I meticulously shuffled the books and left my little comments, I pictured the exchange where I'd have to justify myself. I realize you didn't ask for my opinion, Mr. Lane, but after you finished that James Baldwin book, I thought you may want some Toni Morrison. It would be an extremely brief exchange that resulted in my instant dismissal, but I was unable to. I must stop myself. The library was too lovely and full of possibilities to go in disarray. Additionally, the books I suggested continued to vanish, which had to convey a message. I also started to notice other things. The chair for reading was constantly oriented to receive the optimal amount of daylight throughout the day. There were the pricey reading glasses on the side table had a prescription that indicated the wearer had spent a lot of spending time reading. Occasionally, I would see several bookmarks strewn about as if he was reading more than one book at once. This individual wasn't a book collector. As ornamentation, this person actually lived with them, read them, and who required them. One evening, I discovered a notebook next to his chair that was full of I thought that the handwriting was his. I could see that the pages included what appeared to thoughts, quotations, book notes, and responses to whatever he was reading. The handwriting was quick and accurate, as if someone was attempting to write down thoughts before they fled. I didn't read it, that was going too far in the wrong direction. However, I felt less alone in my literary interest after witnessing it. Another individual who believed that books were valuable to have and to take notes on was somewhere in this estate, even in the event that those discussions were one-sided. My secret curation no longer seemed like trespassing, but rather like cooperation. After 3 weeks, my unapproved library reorganization project, I came onto something that completely altered the course of events. When I spotted something strange, I was shelving some poems that I had discovered strewn all over 3 floors. The novels I'd been suggesting weren't simply vanishing. They were being put back where they belonged, not at random locations, yet thoughtfully selected spots that indicated someone was constructing their own system of organization. The Toni Morrison that I recommended following his reading of James' other African-American works were now placed on the shelves next to Baldwin. The Barbara Other narrative nonfiction was classified with the Tuckman history I had suggested. In addition to reviewing my recommendations, Someone was incorporating them into a more comprehensive collection plan. Encouraged, with this proof that my suggestions were valued, I started to depart. More thorough notes. Rather than only recommending books, I began to explain relationships between writers, themes that connected several pieces, and historical settings that could improve comprehension. He was reading 1984 when I discovered him, so I left Brave New World with the remark regarding dystopian literature and how Huxley and Orwell had distinct but equally dreadful fates. After he completed a Marie Curie biography, I proposed Henrietta Lacks's Eternal Life with considerations for science, ethics, and the tales we share about our discoveries. My notes became increasingly detailed and intimate. I ended up telling him not only which novels he may like, but also why they were important, what they had meant to me, and how they related to more general discussions about art, humanity, and our way of life. Even if they were totally one-sided, I was having the literary discussions I had always imagined. Then one evening I discovered something that stopped my heart in its tracks. In addition to his reading, that was a brand new notebook, not the same one I had previously seen. This particular one was open to a page that was obviously intended for my seeing. In the same exact, someone had written to my enigmatic librarian in handwriting, Your suggestions have been outstanding, and your insightful observations have been enlightening. I'm looking eager to see what you'll recommend next. I appreciate you giving me a fresh perspective on my own collection. Thank you, reader. My hands trembled as I gazed at the note for 5 minutes. When I was holding my dust cloth, he was aware that he had known all along. Additionally, rather than being furious, he was appreciative. I had a fresh perspective on the library when all of a sudden conscious that this was no longer just my secret. In this enormous house somewhere, someone was observing my work, valuing my enthusiasm, and discussing my concepts. I've never felt this way before. I didn't feel like an outsider when I began working at the estate. I had the impression that partner. I left a longer than normal note that evening with my suggestion. Carlos Ruiz Zapon's The Shadow of the Wind was my recommendation, and I wrote about the power of libraries, how books find their audience, and how narratives may foster relationships between strangers. For the first time, I signed it using my true name, Carrie. The call was placed I was on my way home from work on Tuesday morning. After 7 months of employment at the estate, for almost 2 months, they had been exchanging private letters with Mr. Lane. I would become accustomed to our literary exchange, and even brave enough to disagree with his reading on occasion. Options in my notes. The voice on the phone was clear, Miss Michaels. Expert. This is Margot, the personal assistant to Mr. Lane. He wants to see you this afternoon around 2:00 p.m. in his study. My blood became as cold as ice. I apologize. What? At 2:00 p.m. today, Mr. Lane would like to meet with you. I am aware of the address. The address, I replied once a week. Could you tell me the purpose of this? He will clarify when you get there. Kindly enter through the main door. Not the service door, but the main entrance. For months I had been utilizing. This was a severe matter. For the next 4 hours I was in a state of fear. He was aware of the books. That much was evident from our exchange of notes. Perhaps, however, he had finally determined that it was improper. Perhaps there had been a complaint. Perhaps I'd gone too far. With one of my remarks or suggestions, I remembered leaving a note and a copy the previous evening of The Thief of Books. I had written on the strength of language and how books might endure in the face of everything else. Demolished. Was that too presumptuous? Too personal? After 3 outfit changes, I ultimately decided on a basic black dress that seemed suitable for a funeral or a job interview. Considering my present circumstance, either could apply. The Lane Estate's main entrance was even more frightening than I had anticipated. Massive oak doors led to marble steps. It most likely weighed more than my vehicle. I waited while ringing the bell, my heart slamming into my ribcage. It found out that Margot was a kind woman in her 50s. Eyes and a comforting grin. Just in time, Miss Michaels. Mr. Lane he's in his study waiting for you. She guided me past art-filled rooms, and through hallways I had only seen in the dark. That was appropriate for museums, Everything was exquisite, pricey, and a little chilly. Like an extremely fancy hotel with no real residents. It was a different study. Less than I anticipated, book-lined and crammed with the cozy mess that suggested. In fact, there was a worker there. A huge desk was strewn with papers, coffee mugs that hadn't been removed, and there are reading glasses in 3 or more places. There, getting up from a seat by the Gerard Lane, was at the window. From a distance, he appeared shorter than he actually was, and he had dark brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. I saw that he appeared worn out in a way that went beyond simply needing to sleep. "Thank you, Miss Michaels," he murmured in a kinder tone than I had anticipated. "Thank you for attending." I sat on the edge of a leather chair and said, "Please sit down." Like a schoolgirl sent to the principal's office, I folded my hands in my lap. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here," he replied. "I have some idea. And I want to apologize," I added gently. "I realize I went too far. I most certainly shouldn't have left notes. And I shouldn't have accessed your books without authorization. I couldn't resist." He looked at me for a while, and I readied myself for the talk about proper conduct and boundaries. "Rather," he grinned. Mr. Lane sat in the chair across from me and said, "Miss Michaels, I need to demonstrate something to you." He took a tablet off his desk and repeatedly tapped the screen. "The security is this. From the library's stream. I have been observing you at work." I felt sick to my stomach. There were cameras, of course. He had been watching, of course. I might have been arrested for stealing, and I was going to be fired. Or property destruction. However, I noticed something strange as he turned the iPad in my direction. The television displayed me from the previous evening, dusting shelves, meticulously rearranging books, and yes, leaving my message by his chair for reading. However, his editing style made the video appear less like surveillance and more like documentation. "For months, I've been observing you rearrange my collection. Initially, I was irritated. My books are never touched without my consent. I was prepared to fire you." I flinched. "However," he went on, "then I began to observe what you were doing. You weren't only rearranging books at random. Rather, you were producing systems, establishing relationships, and increasing the collection's accessibility. And your suggestions," he said, pointing to a pile of books on his desk. "Everything? They've been amazing. Every single one I'd recommended in the last 2 months." "I'm sorry," I repeated myself. "I should not have, I know." "Stop," he commanded sternly. "I'm sorry, but you've done something amazing here. You've taken a collection that I had been collecting, but never appropriately arranged, and made it useful. In addition, you've introduced me to books that I never would have discovered on my own." He got up and turned to face the window, saying, "Miss, I have a question for you." "Michaels, something I've kept private?" I nodded, but he was unable to see me. "I am going blind." The words lingered in the air between us. My breath caught. "It is a degenerative hereditary disorder. Although I've known for 2 years that it was coming, it's happening more quickly than the physicians anticipated. I am still able to sight, but reading is becoming tough. The words are jumbled, particularly in dim illumination. I might not be able to read for another 6 months." I could see the agony in his eyes as he turned back to me. Not actual discomfort, but the anguish of someone confronting the loss of a necessary item. I've always used books as an escape. While I was establishing the business, I'd come to work 18 hours a day, attend board meetings, and deal with hostile takeovers. Go home and read. The only thing that kept me sane was that, the sole item that felt authentic. I was looking for words that seemed to express what I wanted to convey, but sufficient. After receiving the diagnosis, I began hastily purchasing literature, initially complete collections, rare manuscripts, and editions. I pretended to be protecting them, but in reality, I was merely hoarding in an attempt to surround myself with as many stories as possible that I may never read. He pointed to the library. Outside of his research, Miss Michaels and I were drowning in books, 53,000 of them. Instead of celebrating everything I'd accomplished, they were turning into a monument to everything I was going to lose. Cherished. After then, you began to arrange them. Furthermore, you began speaking. Bar Hayadak to me regarding them, it wasn't only suggestions in your notes, they were dialogues. You shared your enthusiasm, your wisdom, and your love of books. Books felt like friends again for the first time in months, rather than reminders of the things I was losing. I was able to find my voice at last. Mr. Lane, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. Show interest as I have a suggestion for you. His expression was strong, but eager as he leaned forward. I'd like to offer you a position as my personal librarian, not as a cleaner and reader. I would like my collection to be properly cataloged and arranged. I desire you to read to me in order to give me a fresh perspective on books. You should be my eyeballs in the literary realm. Confident that I had misheard, I gazed at him. What? The annual compensation would be $150,000, including housing and benefits, allowance in the event that you wish to reside on the estate. You would be in total control of the library, have funding for new purchases, as well as the flexibility to arrange the collection however you see fit. My head whirled. $150,000 was more than I had earned during the previous 3 years put together. It was money that changed lives. More than that, though, you would entrust your collection to me. You have, Miss Michaels, previously demonstrated your worth. Compared to me, you have shown greater consideration for my books. You've demonstrated I never saw the connections I made. Introduced me to writers I would not have otherwise come across. You've reminded me of the reason I originally fell in love with reading. He reached into his desk and took out a folder. My attorneys have dropped agreement. Bring it home. Go over it. Consider it. However, I hope you will say indeed. I'm looking for someone who knows that books are more than simply things. They're doorways. And you have demonstrated that you are capable of opening them. I previously said yes. Even the contract was read by me. 3 weeks later, I found myself in the library, my library now, along with a group of a budget that made my head spin, a new computer system, and professional catalogers. Gerard, Mr. Lane, as he had requested, I had full creative authority over the rearrangement project because I had called him. However, the most exciting portion took place it was just the two of us in the afternoons when the catalogers left for home. I would never read aloud to an adult, previously, but Gerard was a kind listener. He paid attention in such a way that every word felt significant. He would grin at the voices I gave various characters while I read dialogue. When I arrived he would ask me to reread a particularly lovely passage. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was our first choice, since I believed that the storytelling format would appeal to him. The way the story developed captivated him, as did the character intricacy, as evidenced by the identification and reinvention themes. I never would have picked this up on my own, he said during one of our sessions. I would have written it off as, "You're right, but not for me. It's excellent." That turned into our routine. I would select novels that made him reevaluate his preconceptions, step outside of his comfort zone, and expose him to new viewpoints. We read classic works of literary fiction, poetry, and memoirs. Overlooked, as well as recent works that were changing the literary scene. Additionally, we spoke. Oh, how we discussed characters and concepts. Regarding how writers employed language to discuss how stories influenced and mirrored the reality we live in. The discussions I had always imagined to possess. The conversations about literature I had dreamed about in graduate school. They were occurring daily at the lovely library. Gerard was a genius, enlightening and surprisingly humorous. He had hypotheses regarding untrustworthy storytellers, as well as strong views on the Oxford comma. He had read all of Shakespeare's sonnets and could recite them from memory. At least 2 Agatha Christie novels. He said, one afternoon while I read the heartbreaking line, I used to think losing my sight would mean losing books, from Beloved, forever, but in some respects this is better. As you read, I hear, when I read silently, I missed elements like the language's cadence and the melodies in the words. Really? And having someone to discuss the books with, I've never experienced that right away. I've usually read alone, so this feels like a few weeks into our reading schedule. Gerard took a seat with his coffee and looked contemplative. Sure. Carrie, may I ask you a personal question? Where did this love come from? For books come from? Your discussion of literature isn't only informal. Reading. It has a lot of depth. I grinned as I reflected. My grandmother, She worked as a librarian in a small Oregon town, actually. Each summer, my folks would invite me to stay with her and allow me to assist in the library, where I was stamping due dates at the age of 8, thinking I had the most important job in the world. I was shelving picture books. Yes, it was magical, but the true magic took place at night, we would gather in Grandma's living room, which served as a second library, while she prepared hot chocolate. She would read to me works of literature, not children's books, such as Harper, Steinbeck. As I became older, she would pause every few chapters of Lee, even Dickens, and inquire about my thoughts, like my opinion mattered, in fact. Gerard leaned forward, truly curious. She was, and she sounds amazing. She once claimed that books were like individuals. Some you'll like right away, some you'll like over time, and some will test you in ways that improved you. She showed me that reading was more than simply amusement. It was a chance to engage with the brightest minds. Checked in history. Is that the reason you studied literature? I wanted to learn about. I believed I would become a professor because I understand how tales work and why some novels stick with you forever while others disappear. Or perhaps pursue a career in publishing and contribute to the introduction of fresh voices. I stopped, recalling the sense of hope I had when I crossed that graduating stage. I laughed mockingly and remarked, "Reality. It turns out the world is far more competitive and smaller than I had anticipated, and employers are much less eager to hire young graduates. You ended your self-cleaning since you were a graduate, with high goals but little money. Rather than curating." Yes, but here's the interesting thing. While working in your library, I tried for a lot of jobs, but even as a cleaner, I felt more at home in my grandmother's world because I was surrounded by, even though I couldn't read them all, books made me feel at home. Gerard was quiet. Sibyl, for a second. I believe your grandmother would be proud of you. You managed to respect books, even if the conventional routes were nearby. I hope so. She always said, "The right book finds you when you need it most." I stated that quietly. I never imagined it also extended to jobs. 6 months into my new role, Gerard showed yet another act of kindness. After noticing that my reading time was being reduced by my commute from across town, and gas and rent took a large chunk of my pay. "I have a proposition," he remarked one afternoon. "The property has a guest cottage that hasn't been used in years. It is completely equipped, has its own entrance, and the library is just a 5-minute walk away. Do you think you could live there? I could make housing a part of your remuneration package by adjusting your wage." I was taken aback. It was a pretty cottage. A cozy yet compact room, including a contemporary kitchen, a fireplace, and huge windows overlooking the gardens of the estate. Beyond all else, it would enable me to save money and remain nearer to my favorite work. "Are you certain?" I inquired. "It looks excessive." "You've changed not only my library, Carrie, but also my whole connection with books. I can concentrate on books rather than logistics now that you're close by. It's advantageous to both of us. Additionally, I figured you would enjoy living nearer to the books." The following month, I relocated, residing on the property. At first, it seemed unreal, but soon, it seemed familiar. I could stroll past lovely gardens on my way to work. I had my own. I was saving enough money to begin actively repaying my college loans, and I had a place to retreat to. However, seeing Gerard rediscover his love of books was the highlight. His eyes had been clouded by grief when curiosity and excitement had taken the place of when we first met. He had received a Dickens, a golden retriever guide dog, and had begun going to city literary events with his fresh viewpoint to interact with books in ways he had never thought of before. As we concluded the midnight library one evening, he informed me. It changed my perspective on literature. I believed that losing my to-lose sight was to lose stories, but to find a better way to experience them. Gerard made the decision to let people use his library a year later. One day, within a week, we began organizing literacy programs for nearby schools, author events, and reading groups. The library that was before a personal treasure turned into a community asset where others could find the same, the enchantment that had united us. I still occasionally leave notes near his reading chair. Old habits don't go away easily. However, currently, they are not confidential suggestions from an enigmatic librarian. These are messages exchanged between two buddies who recognize that books are more than merely decorative or amusement. They serve as links between the past and the present, between various viewpoints, between individuals who would not have connected without the enchantment of a common narrative. Additionally, each afternoon after I take a seat and start reading a new book, when as Dickens, soft breathing, and Gerard's footsteps accompany me in our library, I'm reminded that occasionally we don't read the finest stories. They are the ones we live with sometimes. A lovely tale about untapped abilities, surprising friendships, and the transformational potential of reading. What book would you suggest to someone who wants to rediscover their passion of reading? Post your recommendations in the remarks below. If this tale of reading, second chances, and discovering your purpose touched your heart, please hit like and subscribe for more inspirational tales about finding your place in the world. To ensure that you never miss an upload, remember to click the notification bell. We appreciate your time and hope to see you in the next